Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Like, I mean, I love looking at photos, right? And so sometimes I'll just browse old photos. And I've got like a photo stream of pictures of my daughter, Nika, over the years on my work computer. But they date back to when she was like first born. And then anytime, you know, like, for example, my wife Aki, when she takes a photo or something like that, she'll send it to me. I'll just add it to that photo stream. And I've got my my screensaver as the photo stream. And I've also got the timer set to go off really quickly. So if I'm idle for like 30 seconds, it starts a slideshow of pictures of my daughter, like almost immediately, right? And so it's always fun that I'm just constantly browsing, and it's this like ever growing collection of photos. But I mean, of course, there's a lot of photos on there that I've seen dozens, if not hundreds of times, but it never gets old.
Hemant Kulkarni, this is awesome. This is great to have you on Shooting It Raw.
It's great to be on.
Oh, thanks. But it's an artificial moment, right? Where it's like, you know, either with guests or people that, you know, that I know and have had in my life. And so it's a treat because I get to talk shop and have, you know, it's like a very focused conversation for about an hour. And I don't really know where we're going to go with it. I was thinking about my first memory, and let's not make this a big sort of nostalgic tour, but what is your first memory if you go back in where I kind of come up in your memory? Like, what would you say? How old? Where was it? That kind of thing.
I'm trying to think if I recall anything in elementary school. And,
like generally, or just about our relationship?
Well, I mean, generally, but also, yeah, because I remember you and Hassan mainly through the fact that you guys played basketball. Like, I feel like I kind of want to vaguely remember something about the Harold Napper gym and, you know, people in there. But I think, you know, more solid memories are just as, like, as we get into high school, you know, maybe, you know, grade 7, grade 8.
Right. One of my earliest life memories, well, a couple of things, two things. One was that we had a teacher in grade 3. I can't remember her name at this moment.
Miss Didas? Was she Miss Didas?
Maybe that name sounds... No,
Didas?
When we did our health hustle?
Yes, I remember the health hustle.
Yeah, so this is what started off kick-started my fetish for women in turtletnecks and ponytails. Because we would do the health hustle thing of jumping up and down. And she was cute. Yeah. Like, okay, looking back, like, think about it now.
I remember Miss Didas as being attractive, yeah.
Yeah, a light blue turtleneck, and me just being mesmerized by her bouncing tits or breasts. And just being like, oh, so funny. Like an idiot. No, but I was thinking about it, like the first memory of Hemant that I have was, I don't know if it was being in the bathroom, like in the stall, pooing or peeing or whatever, but you lifting over, we're just like teasing each other, you grabbing the top, lifting over and making fun of me, and then me getting so angry and just pulling up my pants and running after you to fight with you. And then I don't remember if we fought or I don't remember what, but
that's hilarious.
That's like one of the first memories of my life. Isn't that funny? That's one of my earliest sort of memories is of that. And I've been ashamed of pooing ever since.
You got to work that out in therapy, man.
My therapist says it's okay. I should just accept it.
Like, I recall, like, some moments of bathroom mischief in elementary school, but I don't recall that particular moment.
What?
Yeah, but it's like, you know, one of those things, like, memory is
Yeah.
is mysterious, right?
Well, much as I'm sure people are really fascinated by this part of the conversation, let's dive into the first photo. It looks like Vancouver, a kind of Vancouver coastline. I may be wrong.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
You're walking with what looks like a 3-year-old child in the distance. The sun is setting. You guys are in partial silhouette. Yeah. So why is this image one that you wanted to start off with?
So this, I mean, there's a couple of things here, but this image, I feel like because of the sort of what I recall was kind of going on then, it really captures for me that sort of the tension of parenthood. And so just a bit of background there. That is one of the beaches near Stanley Park, right? I guess, I don't know if it's Second Beach or Third Beach, one of those, in Vancouver. Yeah. And I think, it's about right. I think my daughter was probably a little younger than 3. She's probably like 2.5. And so she was at that stage where she wanted to walk and run everywhere, but she couldn't really do it very well. And just prior to that photo being taken, she had run ahead of me on the sidewalk and she had taken a wicked spill. You know, like when babies are very young toddlers, like they run and then like their feet just get tangled up and they wreck themselves. Like they just fall so hard. And she had skinned her knee really badly and she had cried, and then we're there at the beach and we don't have a first aid kit with us. So we had to, just kind of get her cleaned up. And so she was walking around with her jeans, one pant leg rolled up because she didn't want to roll back down because the knee was skin. But then I'm thinking, okay, you just totally wrecked yourself. You're going to be a little bit cautious now, right? Like once bitten, twice shy. And she's just so into the beach and she's wanting to run down there. And I'm like, dude, there's salt water. You don't want to get in there because that's going to really hurt. And there's no, and so I'm kind of thinking, okay, I want her to have fun, but then I don't want her to, cry again and, get her cut infected or if she sits on something. And so and I remember my wife was kind of further up, and so she kind of snapped that photo. And I just think that generally the photo is kind of pretty nice. Yeah, that photo brings back memories of that day. And I feel like that tension never really goes away, So it's that, and it's interesting because I work in the disability sector, and one of my colleagues recently wrote a book called The Trampoline Effect. And I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but there's a piece there where we talk about looking at how we provide services for the people that we work for and support, and how there's a tension between safety and flourishing. Right. And that's something that, we encounter in our work, because our work is all about safety, keeping people safe, right? Because we work with vulnerable people, we've got to keep them safe. But that often gets in the way of people having really interesting, fun, good lives, right? Because, you can lock someone in a box, they're going to be super safe, but they're not going to really have a very interesting life. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that's the same tension that parents are kind of living in,
Wow. So just a frame of reference for listeners. So what it is the bottom third. So it's, the sun is setting. Yeah. The sky is slightly clouded over. I mean, I'm a visual person, so I love kind of describing these images. Do you want to give it a go? Do you want to describe what people see in the image? Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of like a wide shot, right? So you sort of see. You see a bit of the beach, and you see, some of the water, and I think there's, see a couple of boats out there, and it's sort of myself and my daughter were sort of roughly centered, but sort of maybe bottom left of center. And a particular thing is that I'm sort of holding her hand, but she's sort of, it almost looks like she's kind of, in a way, trying to get away, or, you know, like try to not hold my hand. And so I feel like that kind of also captures a bit of the feeling there, or at least my, you know, or maybe I'm trying to kind of read that in. But yeah, and my back is, I think, towards the camera. Right.
Yeah. Both of you are kind of walking away from the photographer. So what I want to respond to in terms of how you described it is, it's interesting that okay, so you work with people with disabilities, or essentially people who compared to the average, whatever that average would be, right, of ability, don't quite get as high. And so a child naturally is a really sort of like a early proto-human who has no frame of reference, for example, that salt water burns. And so you, as the sort of the caring adult, say, okay, hold on, let me just stop you from running face forward and, you know, kickstarting a new cycle of crying or whatever. I know it's not necessarily your word to describe this dynamic, but using that word of tension, right? Like you're connected to each other, but there's a pull. Yeah, there's basically a pull between both of you, where she's trying to pull away and you're trying to pull her toward. Or, for example, the tension of, say, people who aren't mobile and then who want to be or to have a kind of full experience of whatever. And then as a caregiver, you kind of have to oversee and set out those limits, right?
Yeah.
So how does the word tension and that connection of two people, of one pulling the other, informs, for example, other things you do? Or for example, now how old is she?
She's now 10 and a half.
10 and a half, yes. And I've seen that you've been doing BJJ together. Oh, no, not judo, right? Judo,
yeah.
What comes up in your head when I put out those words into the ether?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like there's, I kind of go to that word often, I would say, whenever, you know, there's this sense that there are opposing forces, you know, or there's kind of like these two things where you don't necessarily want to go completely to one end, right? And so it's almost like, you know, you have these opposing forces pulling on a band or a wire or whatever, and you're not gonna, that wire remains tense because you're kind of staying sort of in the middle there without going to either end. And so you remain in that tension, in that space where there is tension, where if you decided to go one side or the other, then there wouldn't necessarily be that tension.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we grew up in Montreal, which is not hugely different. You know, like for example, I was speaking to somebody who's from Italy, right? And Italy is like so much smaller than Canada.
Yeah.
And so the difference between Quebec and Vancouver, you know, like Montreal and Vancouver, are pretty big if you think about the cultural, linguistic, all these things.
Sure, yeah.
In Italy, the difference between North and South, even though it's a small country, are really quite dramatic. You know, like in terms of language, in terms of experience and expression. And I wouldn't say the difference between Toronto and Vancouver are really that different, right? Now, what has it been like for you? What has it been like for you to live in Vancouver this long? In terms, because, you know, if we think about tension in Quebec and Montreal, there's the linguistic thing that we grew up with, and you know, we took the piss out of in our own way many times. But how has your experience in Vancouver been?
I mean, you know, my experience in Vancouver has like generally been pretty pleasant, but I think there's probably
sell it, Hemant, sell it. Oh,
no,
it's
but
very
you know,
pleasant.
I think you know, it's more like, you know, my experience in Vancouver has really more to do with just my own personal enjoyment of the environment, and you know, I don't know, like the outdoor spaces and the weather and whatnot.
For sure.
And I feel like it makes a difference when you experience a city, like say growing up, or in your 20s, or in your 40s, you know. And there's probably a piece of Vancouver that I'm missing, having only experienced it like in my 40s, you know what I mean, or late 30s, 40s, because I'm not doing the same things now that I did, like say in my 20s in Montreal, you know. So I think there's like kind of a flavor of the city that I experience in terms of Montreal that that I'm not getting here in Vancouver, you know. Like, so one might say that I don't really know Vancouver the same way that I know Montreal, or that I knew Montreal back then.
Sure.
Because, you know, like I'm not going to night spots. I'm not, you know, frequenting many restaurants all over Vancouver. I'm not hanging out in Vancouver as much, right? I kind of live in a suburb of Vancouver, so it's a day trip, right, for me going into Vancouver. So it's a bit different, I feel.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so let's move on to the next. Let's move on to the next image. In terms of the images that I have, the one that's probably the best in terms of, you know, usability is the one of it looks like a Japanese. Okay, so let's say roughly the image is split in half, with the bottom being a river and some trees flowering, and the top half is this hillside going up rather steeply. And it looks like blossoms, like trees are blossoming, so it's spring. Small, low-rise houses. It's I wouldn't say midday, but it's probably early, like 11 in the morning or 10 in the morning. Nice bright clouds. Yeah. It looks kind of cool because you could just see a few people on the left wearing jackets walking by. There are some nice yellow buttercup style flowers, adding some nice splashes of yellow, and the blossoms on the trees are pink. So what's this image?
Yeah. So this is an image of a place we went to outside of Tokyo. A lot of times when we're there, we'll try at least once when we visit to go stay at a ryokan, which is like a kind of traditional countryside inn in Japan. So it's sort of a space. I kind of liked this scene because it's outside of a train station. So, I mean, if you were to turn around and look behind me, there's sort of like the train station and kind of like a more bustling, sort of busy area. But with my back to the train station facing down the little river, it really looks like this kind of small town countryside type of scene. And I felt like this, just when I walked out of the train station, kind of looked down river there, it just seemed like such a contrast from, kind of like the bustling, densely packed sort of city environment that we came from. And I feel like, it's interesting that you mentioned, how there can be these stark differences in Italy, even though it's a very small country, but something similar that we see in Japan, because, they've got the record for the most population density of any place in the world, right? And yet you can go to places where there's not that many people around, and it really looks like something from 100 years ago, and you have these old buildings, and so that was kind of what
my frame of reference when I looked at this was, this is going to sound very strange to you, but or maybe not. It looks like Mont Saint-Hilaire.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
you know, like for example, like the mount on the right with rather pretty steep cliffs going up.
That's right.
And the river. And I was thinking, well, it could be Mont Saint-Hilaire with the apple trees.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, it's kind of a funny little like double take or whatever. Like that scene could so easily be there in Quebec, and yet when you look at it more closely, you realize no, that's clearly not Quebec.
Yeah, definitely. Like, because I mean, you kind of need to zoom in, and like I would say, the buildings too don't necessarily
match.
Yeah.
Okay, so how many times have you gone? So when you go to Japan, do you mostly go to Tokyo, or do you go outside of Tokyo, or like?
Mostly we go to Tokyo because that's where Aki's family is. So we, typically we'll stay in Tokyo, but then usually, we'll try a little trip outside of Tokyo somewhere, right? And so that's it's kind of like a thing to do there, like just go outside of Tokyo for just a couple of days and you stay at a ryokan. And because the country's pretty small, you can actually, when you go outside of Tokyo, like every region, every prefecture kind of prides themselves on the sort of local flavor, right? And local food and local culture. And so you don't need to go very far from Tokyo to have this kind of experience of like eating food that you've never had before, or just even the local dialects will be pretty distinct. So yeah.
Okay, so when you go, how long do you usually stay for?
I mean, recently I will usually stay for around 2 weeks, I would say, if I go. And then of course, since Nika has been school age, we shifted from going in the spring. Like, so you see this picture that we're talking about, it was taken in the spring. So that's probably one of the last times we visited in the spring when Nika was very little. But, since she's been school age, we typically go in the summer. And she attends public school there because their summer break doesn't exactly correspond to our summer break. So she can leave here right after school's out and still get another month of school in Japan. And so we always go in the summer. So they stay longer.
One of the things I've been facing and thinking about is people who are our age, where we're in film photography and you didn't have cameras in your phones and there were cameras everywhere as ubiquitous and images weren't as like saturating our lives as much.
Yeah.
There's this kind of relationship, I guess, to image making and to just, I don't know, like connecting to the past that is different. You know what I mean? Like in terms of how we reflect back to our experience, right? Like, so now you've got this image of Japan, and you get back to it, pretty easily. But do you remember like making photographs when we were in high school, right? So the black and white style with our like Pentax, whatever it was, K1000 or whatever it is. How do you feel like that's matured in terms of your own brain, like in terms of your own sort of mind and maturity? This is not a clear question. I tend to ask questions that I'm like, well, he's talking a lot, but
no, I think it's like it's changed at least in part because of the devices and the ease of use. Like I remember when I first got into photography, like my dad had to show me how to use the camera. Like it wasn't really obvious. Right. And, like I screwed up roll after roll of film, in the early period, and you didn't even know you screwed it up until you actually got the photos and you're like, oh man, like this is terrible. Like it's out of focus or it's, and so I feel like there was, it needed more initiative back then, but you had to be like, you make this conscious effort that, okay, this event warrants archiving or recording, like, and I'm going to bring my camera, I'm going to be ready, and there's going to be, you know, it requires some kind of like effort, you know. Whereas over the years, I feel like, you know, as things have gotten a lot easier now, it's like so easy, right? Everyone pulls out their phone and it's like you're just taking like hundreds of photos of everything, of anything, right? And so I kind of feel like sometimes you look back at the photos, you know, from high school and you're like, yeah, you know, that was a good idea taking that photo, you know, like as you captured something. You went out of your way to capture something. Whereas now it's like, you know, you got to browse through like, you know, 50 photos to find one that's, you know, because you're just taking photos of everything, you know, you just snap.
Right.
Whatever's going on, just pull out your camera and snap a photo, you know?
Sure.
Yeah. And you know, it's really funny because I feel like people much younger than me are like, it's almost like this paradox because in a way, I feel like it's really easy to take photos now, but I'm still not of the generation that's always taking photos of everything or taking video of everything. Right. Because I still, you know, I grew up in that time where like it's an occasion when you want to take a photo. And, you know, I've done, you know, I'm participating in events or, you know, done things or whatever, where afterwards somebody younger than me will just matter-of-factly say, you know, you have a video of it or photos? And I'm like, no, why would I have a photo of it? And they're like, I don't know. Like, and it's like, they're kind of surprised because they're like, well, you would have a photo of it because you should have photos of everything that you do.
Right.
So it's funny that way.
Okay. I don't know why. She swallowed a fly. Something about what you said got me thinking about let's say from this time that made this image that I'm looking at right now. What was going on in your life at this time right now? Like, you know, when this image was made, you're obviously you're in Tokyo, but what stage of you're living in Vancouver? Yes. Yeah,
I would have been living in Vancouver and you know, working for the same company I was working for now, and yeah, I think my daughter would have been probably on the younger side, you know, maybe.
So we've seen each other off and on over the years, and my apologies for not remembering what led you into the work that you're doing. Is that more in terms of the counselor side, social work side?
So it's, I mean, here we call it community living, right? So it's basically supporting adults with developmental disabilities to be in community, to live in community, to have good lives with whatever support that they might require. So the agency that I work for does a lot of different types of supports. But I don't really work in kind of direct care, direct support. So I work more in the sort of on the management side.
Because I live in Hong Kong, and I feel that Hong Kong is decades behind Canada in a way. I find that Canada is this funny place that is very progressive, but is also not especially self-promotional in the way that Americans are, you know? So I find Canada is like super progressive in many, many ways, and yet, you know, keep a kind of a low profile and just do the more progressive stuff. So let's compare the work you're doing or sort of your daily life in Vancouver versus when you go back to Tokyo and you sort of see, obviously, the challenges of a much larger population. What kind of observations would you make in terms of community living between the two sort of cities?
It's interesting because I consider Japan to be sort of a more, you know, if you have like this continuum between individualistic kind of society to like a more communalistic society, I feel like Japan is kind of more on the communalistic side. And, you know, it's kind of highlighted in this idea that, you know, over there people care about how their behavior is going to affect their neighbor, right? That's kind of at its root. Whereas, you know, in the more individualistic, and I would say probably the United States is at that other end, there it's kind of like I should be free to do whatever I want with no constraints. And, you know, you're less concerned about how your freedom to do whatever you want will affect your neighbor. And I feel like Canada's probably not, you know, as far over that end as the United States, but they're probably a little bit more to that end. Yet, interestingly, Japan is I would say behind in terms of how you know, the more kind of vulnerable people in their communities are treated, right?
Right.
And so in terms of, like, you know, really innovating in that area, right? Like how people with you know, disability, developmental or otherwise, how can we make sure that everyone has a really good life? You know, I think we're probably further ahead here than they are over there, which is interesting given that they're on one level very communalistic, right? It's like the idea that we're all kind of, we should all care for each other and support each other. But
what kind of challenges have dealing with COVID brought to your works? Like, has it really changed how you guys are working?
Oh yeah, like dramatically, right? Because the services that our frontline workers provide are considered essential services, right? So, you know, we have some services that are running 24 hours a day, like residential services, you know, where people are supported to live, you know, in their homes.
Right.
So workers are going into work all the time. And so we've had to do a lot in terms of like COVID precautions. And then we've had outbreaks in our programs where either a person served, like a client or a staff member, or both, multiple people got sick with COVID. And yet, you know, for example, if a client tests positive, we can't not serve them. And so they'll need staff to be working during the course of an and because some of the training we do, you know, was able to shift to online, but other training that we do necessarily needs to happen in person. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, there was a person that had attended one of my training sessions later tested positive for COVID-19. And so then, you know, everybody who had been at that training session, you know, including me, you know, we have to kind of self-monitor for like a certain period of time for any potential symptoms, you know. In the end, nothing came of that, but it still sort of highlights that even though I'm kind of at arm's length, you're never like 100%, right? It's because of the work that the agency's doing. You know, there's always some thread there.
Right. Do you know anybody like, I mean, other than, you know, the coworkers, but has anybody in your family or anything like that who's tested positive?
No, nobody, you know, nobody in my direct family.
Yeah. You know, my sister, her whole little family got COVID. And, so on the podcast, she talks about the shame. I sort of teased her about, you know, like what was worse, getting COVID or I don't know if it was chlamydia or gonorrhea. And she's like, well, first of all, I've never had gonorrhea. And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever you say. But
that's funny.
But she was just like, yeah, there's a huge shame involved with, you know, when you get tested positive. And I can imagine for you with your work, because in a way it's an essential service for many people's lives. Like,
yeah,
you know, you really are a huge part of maybe even, I don't know, would you use the word survival?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say the you know, anything that's like an essential service is really, you know, like it's something that we cannot pause or curtail for any reason. So yeah, for some of the people that we support, yeah, I would say it's pretty essential for survival. And I mean, it's sort of a testament to the kind of remarkable resiliency of our staff, right? Because to think we have a kind of a 24-hour on-call coverage sort of system. So like, for example, if somebody calls in sick or can't make it to their shift, we can't close up shop, right? And that shift has to be filled.
Sure.
So we need to call somebody else in for that shift. And so it can be a difficult undertaking. Say I'm sick with COVID-19 and the staff who's working with me can't make it to work. And so then somebody calls you and says, "Hey, Rand, you gotta go in. Can you pick up that shift?" And FYI, Hemant has COVID-19, and you have to decide whether you want to pick that shift up or not. And to think that our staff, by and large, are filling those shifts. Like they're saying, "Sure, I'll come in. I'll cover for whoever's sick." I mean, it's pretty humbling.
Let's move on to the next photo, only because it has to deal with coffee, and I'm a coffee addict. Yeah, so the image is of your, it's a very straight image of your coffee pot, and I'll let you describe the photo, but what is this image of?
Yeah, it's just, we got this recently, actually, over Christmas. It was a Christmas gift. And so it's one of those classic Bialetti mocha pots, the aluminum, pot that you can brew coffee with over on the stove, on a burner. And so it's just there sitting on my stove. And I think it's, I think that image is when we just fired it up. And so
it looks pretty new. New. Not so too used.
No. So it's and I'm it's funny because I've used a French press and I've used a regular drip coffee maker. And one of my pet peeves is when a coffee maker is just like a hot mess. It's like just all grimy and stained, because so I'm a bit obsessive with that type of thing. And so I really it's almost like this Zen activity for me. Following drinking coffee, I like to clean the coffee maker.
Yeah.
Thoroughly. So even like the drip coffee maker, I would dry out all the inside and, wash the pot and all that stuff. So the same with the mocha pot. You're right. It's not that old because we got it in December, but I've definitely taken care to clean it very thoroughly every time. But yeah,
okay, so let me draw a few strings back in time and forward and all this stuff. Okay, and I'm only going to tease you a little bit, just a little bit, very gently. Okay, listening to your voice, and a person who doesn't know us would compare both of us and say, for example, I am kind of spastic and I talk very fast and and then you're a bit more measured and a bit more careful, a bit more even. I remember you practicing drumming, right? And I think that instruments like the drums in some ways fit a certain character, but also set certain things about a person. So there's that. And in my mind, what you're like is a person who, when you say, I'm very careful about cleaning my coffee pot to make sure,
I was wondering what that would make me sound like.
No, but listen, it's all love. And, but it's, I want to tie that into, for example, okay, so you've got the drumming is all about maintaining a rhythm, right? Either fast or slow. Okay. And it's very physical. And then you've got the judo, right? How many years have you been doing judo now?
Oh, it's been a long time. Maybe 20 plus years, 25 years, something like that.
25? 20 more? I mean, did the judo start when you went to Japan, or did it start before?
Yeah, it's sort of on and off, over the years. So it probably started before I went to Japan, and then in Japan, strangely enough, I did more BJJ than judo, and then I kind of picked judo back up when I came back to Canada. So it's sort of, in sort of starts and stops. So it's probably like a continuous stretch, probably since I really came back to Vancouver, or came to Vancouver.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that there's a theme, for example, a connection that you could make or not? Maybe you can't, but as, for example, somebody who's doing percussion, somebody who does judo for this long, to commit to it, somebody who does the work that you do with essentially caring for other people in overseeing things that maybe they would not manage or not be attentive to, for example, being very careful about, because, for example, when people say, oh, you go to Japan, I mean, Japan has this really well established reputation for fine, careful craft, right? As far as the culture is concerned. So, from tea making ceremonies and that kind of stuff. So how would you connect all those things to this coffee pot?
Yeah, I mean, one theme might be, that I appreciate order. I don't know if that's necessarily, like a good thing or a bad thing.
It's just who you are. It doesn't matter.
And so I can see that thread being there in a few of the things that you mentioned, or if not all of them. Yeah. So it's even, if you look at these different ways of making coffee, the mocha pot is probably moving in the direction away from order, right? Because if you use a drip coffee maker, it's pretty no hassle. Like you put the amount of coffee when you hit the button, and it's going to do its thing, right? And it stops when it's done, and you're going to get a pretty consistent product. But nonetheless, even if I think about my appreciation for the coffee that the mocha pot produces, it's like I've tried to extract some sort of order there, because, initially I was like looking under the hood all the time to see where the coffee was at, to make sure that I'm going to take it off the burner at the right time. Right. But then after a while I was like, I gotta, just have the timer going on the oven, and I'll try to see how many minutes it's been when the coffee is at a certain, but that doesn't really work, because it's like the mocha pot I've realized is kind of finicky. And so sometimes it's like 5 minutes, sometimes it's like 6 minutes. And so I'm like, that is not working for me, because I need to know, is it going to be 5 minutes or is it going to be 6 minutes, And so I've done it a few times where I'm like, the timer will go, because I set it for 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, it should be ready. And I peek under the hood, and it's like still way down there. And I'm like, what's going on here? Right?
It's chaos. Right? Yeah. It's chaos in a way, right? You think that the element is the same.
That's
heat,
right.
The same volume of water.
Yeah. And then, so now I'm thinking, okay, you need like one of those stoves with the digital readout, so you can set your element to a specific, because now I got one of those knobs. It's like, who knows what temperature it's at. You just twirl the knob and you try to get it kind of in the middle for medium.
Hemant, you poor man.
And so it could vary by multiple degrees every time you do it, right?
Are you an anxious person about your coffee pot?
No. Honestly, like, I would say I am the absolute opposite of an anxious person. It's not that getting it wrong would really bother me. Because if I get it wrong, I'm kind of the type of person who's like, oh, well, I screwed it up this time. So it's not so much that. It's just when I get it right, I'm very happy. It's not that so much that I'm unhappy when I get it wrong, if that makes sense.
I don't think of you as obsessive compulsive.
No.
I think of you as somebody who kind of like, appreciates order.
Yeah. It's, like, I don't have to have order everywhere, but I like it when it's there, when there's an opportunity to have it or to see it, and so I kind of get a small pleasure after I drink the coffee. from taking the pot apart right away and cleaning it out and drying it and then putting it away. You know, I just kind of feel like, yes, this is nice.
Yeah, it's a very nice. But you have to talk about the beans. You can't just put the whatever in the beans.
Yeah, you know, this is the other aspect, you know, that kind of came to mind when I picked that photo, because I can appreciate the full spectrum of coffees. And the mocha pot was actually originally a gift. You know, it's like one of those gifts that keep on giving type of thing, where like, so I gave it, it was a Christmas gift for my wife, and she really likes lattes with foam, you know, and so I said, here's this mocha pot, but the gift that keeps on giving aspect of it is that you don't have to do it, because she's not the type of person who will ever make coffee in a mocha pot. It's just, you know, there's this term in Japanese, mendokusai, which is like the best translation is like, it's a pain in the ass. Like, kind of who wants to do that, right? Because it's just so mendokusai. Yeah. I would rather just do something that's more simple or easy or whatever. But I said, well, you don't have to make the mocha, because I'll make the mocha for you every weekend. You know, not during the week, because I mean, there's not a lot of time, but weekends, I'll make a mocha for you every weekend, you know, like Saturday and Sunday. Aww. And so since we got the mocha pot, I've been making mochas every weekend. And so it's a whole process, right? There's all these steps, and then you got to froth the milk and then but the thing is, the mocha pot makes this tiny, tiny amount of coffee. And so it's just enough for like one shot each. And then you got the milk and the foam. And so you have one latte each, but I like to have 2 coffees in the morning, right? And
so you have to do it all over again.
Well, no. So this is the thing. Like, I'm not about to make another mocha, right? That's just too much, right? That's my limit. And so
you lightweight.
My wife finds it just incredible that I'll have this mocha that took me like a half hour to make. And then the second cup of coffee that I have is instant coffee crystals in water that's been heated in the microwave.
Oh, Hemant, what have you done?
I will thoroughly enjoy that second cup, you know, as much as I enjoyed that first cup. And I'll be like, what? Coffee is coffee. Like, I like them all. Like, I can grind my own beans and do like a whole process, or I can get instant out of the cupboard and, you know, dissolve it in hot water from the sink.
Blasphemy.
And, you know, like, I know people who will only drink a certain type of coffee, or coffee from a certain place, or only done a certain way. But I'm kind of equal opportunity, you know, like
Sure. I got it. Look, we've been talking for a while now, and I just have one sort of... Okay, so one of the things that you know, I've been doing a lot of work in and around and stuff is this notion of mastery, right? Like the mastery of service, mastery of process, mastery of whatever. And I know that anybody who's dedicated a long time of their lives or whatever to something like a martial art, or something like, you know, a career, for example.
Yeah.
To get mastery, you kind of just keep learning how little you know of the big picture, you know, in a way.
Yeah.
And so how do you feel that understanding, you know, where you are far ahead of beginners, and yet you still kind of realize you have so much more to learn, how that creates a tension? Because do you teach your daughter judo, or you just train together?
I teach her judo, and probably for a few years. I mean, it's all kind of on pause with the pandemic, but I was doing a little bit of coaching and instructing at the clubs that I trained at. So yeah, it's that's a great. Was it a question? I don't know if it's a question. It's great. Whatever it was.
Whatever it was awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, like so let's bring that together. Like let's kind of close on that sense of, okay, so if you've learned anything, or if you do have a perspective on this notion of mastery, when you're teaching.
Yeah.
So, for example, before you're trying to prevent your daughter from running into the water after she scraped her knee, you're just like, hey, listen, you may not see the bigger picture. And in the same way with your work, right? Okay, we need to care for you. And then in the same way with teaching judo and whatever. So what has that maturity or experience sort of revealed?
Yeah, I think, with, I don't know if it's like true sort of mastery, like a complete mastery is necessarily possible in any, I think with most things, you can always kind of expand your level of mastery or whatever the case is. But I really feel like there's this connection between that path towards mastery or seeking mastery or appreciating it and teaching it and sharing it, So that's, it's something just generally in my life, not necessarily in one specific area, but I've always enjoyed that idea of teaching, because on a certain level, it's essentially sharing, right? Because it's something that you liked. So you found something that, hey, this is really neat. And then you get to share it with somebody else, right? And I guess mastery comes in there because you want to try your best to kind of convey what you have collected in an accurate or authentic way, right?
Right.
But I think that urge is there with everyone because, even people who are just starting out, like doing judo, like they've done it for 2 days, and then they're talking to somebody it's their first class, that they can still say, share something, some insight or something that they've observed or something, to do. So I think that's always there. And they kind of move in lockstep. Not that everyone wants to share or teach along the way to mastery, but I think that happens for some people.
Sure, but it's a very human trait, right? To sort of, if anything, I think that's how our species has really, as far as my work is concerned, that's how we make that connection, is saying that our species really has been able to progress and evolve so rapidly because of our ability to keep lifting up, the people around us from whatever we're learning.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay, Hemant, thank you so much. It was really good to catch up and have you confirm that you're a little bit OCD about some of your things, but not really. You're not really OCD. You're fine.
It was
thanks, man.
Yeah, it was great. Really appreciate talking with you today, and thanks for the opportunity to share company with some of your illustrious guests.
I just hope that it's hard to know. It's hard to predict and anticipate what would it inspire in somebody else. So for example, some people may find Paul Watson really cold. Be like, yeah, whatever. But then listen to you and go like, oh, wow, man, like that hit the right sort of notes to kind of inspire them to buy a new coffee pot or whatever. No, just kidding. Go to Japan.
There you go.
No, I love it.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.